For 20 years, Penelope waited for one man. Then he came home, and she did not move. He is standing in the great hall of his own palace. He has bathed. He is wearing clean clothes for the first time in longer than anyone in that room can calculate. Athena has restored him, taken the salt and the sea and the years out of his face, put back something closer to the man who left. He looks, more or less, the way she would remember him, and Penelope is sitting across the room, not moving toward him, not speaking, not crying, just looking. The way you look at something when you are trying to decide whether it is real. Her son, Telemachus, is standing beside her. He is 20 years old. He has never seen his father's face except in other people's descriptions of it. He looks at his mother, looks at the man standing in the hall, looks back at his mother, and says one word: esclerocardie, hard-hearted. That word has sat in the middle of this story for 3,000 years, and nobody has quite answered the question underneath it. After 20 years, why couldn't she cross that room? Not did she love him, not was she glad he was alive. But why? When the door finally opened, did she stay in her chair? This was her latest masterpiece of guile. That is how Antinous describes it. Antinous, the loudest of the men who have taken over Odysseus's palace, the one who speaks first and thinks about it afterward, stands up in the assembly of Ithaca and explains what Penelope has been doing for the past 3 years. He is furious. He has been made to look foolish, and he wants everyone to understand whose fault that is. Masterpiece of guile. That is the phrase he uses. I want you to hold that phrase. Hold where it comes from. Hold who is saying it. And why? Because the version of Penelope's story that most people carry around the faithful wife, the clever strategist, the woman who outwitted a palace full of men for 2 decades. That version comes almost entirely from people like Antinous, people who were watching her from the wrong side of the room. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the Odyssey. The beginning of her story. Ithaca, a small island off the western coast of Greece. Not a great kingdom. Not the kind of place that appears in the center of maps. The kind of place that exists because someone has to live somewhere. Odysseus is king here. Has been for a few years. They have a son, Telemachus, who is still young enough that his entire world is this island. This palace. These rooms. And then news arrives from the mainland. Helen of Sparta, Penelope's cousin, has left her husband Menelaus and gone to Troy with a Trojan prince named Paris. Menelaus wants her back. He is calling in every oath every Greek king has ever sworn. Odysseus has sworn that oath. He has to go. Homer does not give us a farewell scene. There is no long goodbye in the text. No dramatic moment on the shore. No promises made at the shoreline that we are invited to witness. Just the fact of his departure and the world it left behind. Penelope, Telemachus, too young to remember this later. An island, a palace full of servants and guards, and the ordinary machinery of a kingdom that now had no king. She ran it. The farms, the stores of grain, the loyalty of servants, alliances that could collapse if the wrong word reached the wrong person. Telemachus, too young to walk when Odysseus left, needed to survive. To grow. To become someone his father could stand beside when he returned. She did that. Alone. Without instruction. Without anyone to report to. For 10 years. While Troy burned. While the names of dead men filtered back to Ithaca one by one, and she listened to each name and waited to hear whether the next one was his. It never was. And then the war ended. The war ended. And the kings came home. Agamemnon came home to Argos and was killed by his wife in the bath on his first night back. Menelaus came home to Sparta with Helen. Odysseus did not come home. No ship arrived at Ithaca. No messenger. No survivor from his fleet to explain what had happened, or where he was, or whether he was still alive. Just silence. The silence lasted another 10 years. Somewhere in the middle of that silence, no one records exactly when the men started arriving. Young men, noble families from Ithaca and the surrounding islands, 108 of them, by Homer's count. Their logic was not entirely unreasonable, from where they were standing. Odysseus had been gone for 20 years. No one had heard from him in 10. The odds were not good. And if Odysseus was dead, whoever married his widow became king of Ithaca. So they came. They moved into the palace. They ate Odysseus's food, drank his wine, slept under his roof, and waited for Penelope to make up her mind. What Penelope did next is the part everyone knows. She told them she would choose when she had finished weaving a burial shroud for Laertes Odysseus's aging father. It would be wrong, she said, to let such a great man face death without a proper shroud prepared. Surely they could understand that. Surely they could wait. They could. They waited. And every night after the palace had gone quiet, after the suitors had drunk themselves to sleep and the servants had retired, Penelope went back to the loom and took apart what she had done that day, thread by thread, in silence, in the dark, for 3 years. Antinous finds out because one of her own servants tells him. One of the women she trusted enough to have in her household, one of the women who watched her do this every night, tells the suitors. They catch her in the act. They force her to finish it. Against her will. Antinous says, "Masterpiece of guile," he says. And then he looks at Telemachus and waits for the young man to agree that his mother has behaved badly. There is a moment in Book 1 before all of this. Before the assembly. Before Antinous has any reason to be publicly angry. That I want to go back to. A small moment. Easy to move past. Penelope comes downstairs. The suitors are in the great hall. A bard is singing about the Trojan War, about the Greeks and their long journey home. Penelope hears the song, and she asks him to stop, not because it is a bad song, because it is causing her pain, because every song about Troy is a song about the place where her husband disappeared. She is crying when she asks, and Telemachus, her son, 20 years old, the boy she raised alone, turns to her and says, "Go back up into your room and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff. Speech will be the business of men, all men, and of me, most of all. For mine is the power in this household." She goes. Homer says she goes back upstairs, thinking over the words her son has said. He doesn't tell us what she thought about them. This is the version of Penelope that has survived 3,000 years. The one Antinous describes, the one her own son manages, the one that exists in the spaces between other people's stories about her. A woman whose cleverness is noted with a mixture of admiration and irritation. A woman whose grief is acknowledged and then redirected. A woman whose choices, the real ones, the ones made without witness, are recorded without explanation, as though the explanation were obvious. But there is one detail in Antinous' account that he mentions without understanding. He says she unraveled the shroud every night. Not that she failed to finish it, not that she was too tired or too busy, that she went back every night and took it apart. Antinous tells this story as evidence of her deception. He never asks the more obvious question. Nobody forced her to unravel it. She chose to. Every night, alone, in the dark, not as strategy, as choice, the only one entirely hers. And for 3 years, nobody knew. Think about what that means. Not as strategy. Not as the clever plan of a woman playing a long game against 108 opponents. Just as a fact. Every morning, she sat down at the loom and added to the shroud. The threads accumulated. The work grew visible, substantial, something a person could point to and say, she is making progress. Every night, she went back and made it smaller again. No one was watching. No one would have seen. She could have simply not unraveled it. She could have let it accumulate. Let it grow. Let it finish, and whatever happened next would have happened next. But she didn't. She went back, night after night, to a piece of work that she was the only one who knew would never be done. Antinous calls this guile. He is not wrong. Exactly. It is guile. But guile is something you do to fool someone else. Who was she fooling when no one was watching? That question sits in the middle of everything that comes after. And nobody in 3,000 years of reading this story has quite decided what to do with it. That question is where we're going. Not the version Antinous tells. Not the one her son manages. Not the one that ends when the hero comes home and everyone agrees it was worth the wait. The one she lived, alone, at the loom, at night, thread in her hands, the same thread, every night. She knows the texture of this thread better than she knows anything else that has happened since he left. The weight of it, the way it catches on the rough places at the ends of her fingers, the specific sound it makes when it pulls loose from the weave, almost nothing, almost silence, but distinct. She has done this so many times that the sound doesn't wake the servants anymore. They have learned to sleep through it. Or maybe they haven't. Maybe they lie awake and listen and say nothing. She doesn't ask. 3 years of this. And here is what I want to ask, not about the strategy, not about whether it worked or for how long, but about what the loom was. In Ithaca, in this palace, in the world of this story, Penelope has very little she can decide. She cannot throw the suitors out. She does not have the authority. Telemachus will eventually try. But even he, a young man, the king's son, struggles to move them. She cannot prevent them from eating, cannot prevent them from staying, cannot prevent the conversation. She is not supposed to hear that if Odysseus is dead, whoever marries her controls this island. She cannot decide when to grieve or when to stop. She cannot decide what her son is allowed to do or not do. She cannot decide whether the suitors will wait or stop waiting or do something worse. Most of the major forces acting on her life are not in her hands. But in the room with the loom, late at night, when the sounds of the palace have gone quiet, she can make something, and then she can take it apart. Those are her decisions, entirely hers. Not performed for anyone, not announced to anyone, not subject to anyone's approval or Telemachus's authority, or the logic of 108 men who have decided they know what her future should look like. Just this thread goes here, and this thread comes free. This is what control looks like when you have very little of it. Not power, not rebellion, Just this one thing, in this one room, entirely mine. A woman, a room, a loom, without witness. This is not a grand theory about Penelope. It is a small observation about what people do when most of what matters is outside their control. You find the thing that is still yours, even if it's small, even if no one can see it, even if the only proof that you made a choice is the fact that you unmade it before morning. Book 4. A messenger arrives at the palace with news that Penelope had not expected. The suitors, not content to wait, have sent a ship to intercept Telemachus. Her son is traveling, looking for news of Odysseus, and they intend to kill him before he comes back. What Penelope does next is not strategy. It is a woman coming apart at the seams of her composure and not being able to stop it. Homer says she cannot eat, cannot sleep, sits with the women of the palace and weeps in the kind of sustained, physical grief that empties a person out. She has held it together for a decade. She has managed this palace, and these men, and this silence, and this not knowing. But the idea of Telemachus, not Odysseus, Telemachus, the one thing she has actually had for 20 years, the one proof that any of it meant anything, the possibility of losing him is the thing that breaks through. She prays to Athena, not for Odysseus, not even for herself. Save my son. Athena does not appear to her directly. Instead, she sends a dream, the shape of Penelope's sister, Iphthime, to find her in the night. The dream does not speak about Odysseus. It says Telemachus is safe. The gods are with him. Do not be afraid. Penelope asks even in the dream, even from the shape of her sister. What about Odysseus? Is he alive? Is he coming back? The dream says, I cannot tell you that. I was not sent for that. And then it leaves. She wakes up. Telemachus is still not home. Odysseus is still not home. The suitors are still downstairs. Nothing has changed. But something in her has shifted slightly toward the practical, toward what she can still do. And she gets up and goes about the day. She does this for a long time, one day after another, each one almost identical to the one before, until the night that isn't. Book 18. This is the moment most readings of this story skip past too quickly. Athena comes to Penelope again, not in a dream this time, but in a subtle movement of inspiration, the way gods work when they want to move someone without being seen to push. She puts it into Penelope's mind to go downstairs, to appear before the suitors, to be seen, and Athena makes her beautiful. Not in the ordinary way. Homer says, times with ambrosia, smooth as the oils the goddess love applies. Her face, her bearing, something that hadn't been visible in the way she'd been moving through this palace for the last 20 years. Penelope goes down. The suitors stop talking. She stands there, in the hall that used to be her husband's, surrounded by the men who have been eating his food and sleeping under his roof. And she speaks to them, gently, in a way that draws out their instinct to give her things. She mentions that Odysseus, before he left, told her that if he didn't return, she should eventually remarry. She should let suitors bring her gifts. She should not let the house go empty. The suitors, moved by something they mistake for tenderness, send for gifts. Gold and fine cloth start arriving from their households. She accepts all of it. And Odysseus, who is sitting in the corner of the same hall, dressed as a beggar, watching his wife work a room full of men who want to replace him. Homer writes, His heart was glad because she drew gifts from them. Stop. Stay with that. His heart was glad. The scholars read this as tactical pleasure. She is extracting resources from the enemy, depleting them, outmaneuvering them. Odysseus, the strategist, recognizes strategy when he sees it. Maybe, or maybe something else is happening. This man has been gone for 20 years. He has spent the last decade being held by a goddess who wanted him for her husband, watching ships, trying to get home, telling himself the reason he wanted to leave was the woman waiting in Ithaca. And now he is home, and his wife is in the room, and she is alive and moving and present. Not the figure he has been carrying in his imagination across 10 years of sea, but an actual person, doing something, making choices, taking up space in the room. Maybe his heart was glad for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy. Homer doesn't say. Homer only gives us the fact. His heart was glad. The shroud is finished now. They forced her to complete it. That particular form of not deciding has been closed off. Think about what it cost to finish it. Not the labor. The labor was the easy part. She had done it and undone it so many times that her hands knew the pattern without being asked. What it cost was the nightly return. The ritual of going back, the private act of making something smaller that no one else was making larger. The choice repeated. Deliberate, silent to keep the story from ending. Because finishing means deciding, and she was not ready to decide what came next. When they found her, when they caught her in the act and told her to finish, she lost the last thing she was doing entirely on her own terms. Not the shroud. She never cared about the shroud. The unraveling. That is what they took from her. The right to keep something permanently, privately, stubbornly unfinished. And now with the loom silent, with the thread finally still, there is one question left that is still hers to answer. Not who will she marry. The suitors have already decided they will answer that. Not what happens to Telemachus. The gods seem to have opinions about that too. The one question that is still entirely in her hands. Whether to end it, now, on her terms, before someone else decides for her. She has one thing left. And tonight, after the suitors sleep, after the palace goes quiet, a stranger is sitting in the great hall, and she is going downstairs to sit with him, because she has something to ask, and she is running out of nights to ask it. The stranger had been in the hall all day. Penelope had heard about him, a beggar who arrived that morning, who was somehow still there by evening, who spoke to the suitors in a way that beggars do not usually speak to anyone. Telemachus had told her not to worry. Telemachus had been telling her not to worry about various things for the past year, with the unearned authority of a young man who has recently decided he is ready to be the head of a household. She is not worried. She is curious. There is a difference. The suitors are predictable. She has memorized their patterns, who drinks too much and becomes loud, who becomes quiet and therefore more dangerous, who is watching her and who is watching Telemachus and who is watching the door. This man she doesn't know yet. And she has found, in 20 years of managing a palace full of people with agendas, that the ones she doesn't know yet are often the ones worth knowing. She sends word that she will come down. She goes to the stairs. She does not know that downstairs, in the body of the stranger, is the answer to the only question she has spent 20 years trying not to ask. The palace is quiet. Not peaceful quiet. There is a difference. On an island where 108 men have been eating your food and making plans about your future for the better part of 3 years. Peaceful is when nothing is wrong. Quiet is when everything wrong has temporarily stopped making noise. The suitors are asleep. Telemachus has gone to his room. The servants have put out most of the lamps. And in the great hall, in the specific quality of dark that exists when a fire has burned down but not yet gone cold, a man is sitting, not asleep, thinking. Penelope comes downstairs. She sits near the fire, not close to him, not the distance of intimacy, the distance of a queen receiving information from a stranger who has not yet earned more than that. She asks her servants to bring a chair, bring cushions. She will sit here for a while. She has questions. The conversation that follows is the longest between Penelope and Odysseus in the entire Odyssey. Hours. About him who he claims to be, where he says he has traveled. About Odysseus, what the stranger has heard, where he supposedly saw him last. About her, what she's been doing, how long she can continue. And neither of them at any point says who they really are. He does not tell her. She does not ask in a way that forces an answer. They speak around the thing they are both thinking about, the way people do when the thing is too large to approach directly and the night is too short to survive the approach wrong. She tells him about the shroud, not because he asks he doesn't ask, but because at a certain point in a conversation like this, the thing you've been carrying finds its way out. She explains what she did, how she did it, how long it lasted, how it ended. She doesn't apologize for it. She doesn't perform regret. She states it, the way you state something that is simply true about you, something you did, that you would recognize as yours, regardless of what anyone else thought of it. The stranger listens. He doesn't call it a masterpiece of guile. Then she asks him about Odysseus. He tells her about meeting him, a story, a fiction, carefully built to be just accurate enough that she has to keep listening, and she listens. And he describes the cloak, the gold brooch with the hound and the fawn, the fine woven tunic, and Penelope. Homer says, as the snow melts on the mountain peaks when the warm southeast wind breathes down and melts what the west wind piled, so her beautiful cheeks dissolved in tears. She is not crying because she believes him. She is not crying because she doesn't. She is crying because someone is describing her husband in specific, accurate detail: the cloak, the brooch, the way he wore it. And the last person who described him, that specifically was her, to herself, years ago, trying to hold on to what she remembered. She composes herself. She asks, is he alive? Is he coming home? The stranger says yes. He is certain. He will arrive before the new moon. Penelope says she hopes that's true. She says it in a way that might be hope, or might be the practiced courtesy of a woman who has been told this by 17 other strangers over 20 years. She is not dismissive. She is careful. There is a difference. Then she tells him about the dream. 20 geese. Her geese, she is careful to say this. Her time's geese. The ones that live in the yard, that she watches from the windows. 20 of them, eating in the yard, and an eagle comes down from the mountains. The eagle breaks their necks, un by un, all 20. She weeps in the dream. The Achaean women gather around her, weeping with her, while the eagle circles and then lands on the roof of the palace. And then the eagle speaks in a human voice. Be of good cheer. This is no dream, but a true vision. The geese are the suitors. I am your husband. I have returned. She woke up, looked out at the yard. The geese were at the trough, eating the way they always eat. The stranger tells her, the dream is clear. Odysseus himself explained it. The suitors will die. This is a good sign. Penelope says dreams are strange and unclear. They don't always come true. There are two gates, ivory and horn, and the dreams that matter come through the gate of horn. But she doesn't know which gate this one came from. She says this carefully. Logically, like someone who has been hoping for a very long time and has learned to protect herself against the specific damage of hoping wrong. But here is the thing Homer records and doesn't explain. She wept for the geese. Before the eagle spoke, before the interpretation arrived, before anyone told her what the dream meant or was supposed to mean. She wept because the geese were dead. 20 birds. Not symbols, not yet. Just 20 birds that lived in her yard and needed someone to feed them and were killed by something that came from outside and was not interested in what they had been to her. Maybe the dream means nothing. Dreams are strange. Homer says this twice, through Penelope's own mouth. Or maybe, only maybe, there is a reason, at the subconscious of a woman who has been waiting 20 years for her life to resume, places her grief not in the arrival of the hero, but in the loss of the birds. The small things, the daily things, the things that made up the life she was actually living. The geese were still eating in the yard. The morning after, the same as always. She tells him she has made a decision. Tomorrow, our contest. She will bring out Odysseus's bow, the great bow that no one else can string, that has been locked away since the day he left. And she will set it up with 12 axe heads in a row. And whoever can string the bow and drive an arrow through all 12, that man she will marry. That man can have the house. She says this without drama. The way you say something you have decided and are not asking anyone's opinion about. The stranger tells her she is right to do it. Odysseus will be here before they can string it. She thanks him for his kindness. She says it is late. She is going to bed. What has just happened in this scene is not entirely clear even to scholars who have read it for centuries. Did she know? The question has been debated since antiquity. Some scholars argue she recognized him the moment she sat down, that everything after was not ignorance, but a different kind of knowing. Homer does not answer this. He records what she says, what she does, the order in which she does it, then moves on, leaving the interior to whoever is reading. But consider the sequence. She sits with a stranger for hours. He describes her husband's cloak and brooch with precision. He tells her, Odysseus is coming. He tells her the dream is a good sign. And then that same night, at the end of that conversation, she announces the contest. The contest that, if won by the right person, ends everything. The contest that gives Odysseus a bow in his hands and a reason to be standing in the center of the great hall. The contest she devises while sitting across from a man she has not been able to stop looking at carefully all evening. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe the timing is coincidence. Maybe grief and exhaustion and 20 years of not deciding finally collapsed into a single decision on the night when she happened to need one. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing and gave him what he needed to do it. Homer doesn't say. He only tells us she went upstairs. She slept, and the stranger stayed in the hall below and thought about tomorrow. Here is what tomorrow will look like. From the outside, a contest, a bow that no one can string, suitors failing, A beggar asking to try. Chaos. A man revealing himself. Bodies. Here is what tomorrow will look like from the inside, from behind the eyes of the woman sleeping upstairs. A door opening. The question is, what's on the other side? And whether, when it opens, she will recognize what she sees, or whether 20 years has changed both of them so thoroughly that recognition itself becomes the hardest part. She goes upstairs. Athena gives her sleep deep, merciful, the kind that doesn't leave room for more dreaming, and the stranger stays in the hall below, alone, thinking about the bow, about tomorrow, about the woman who just went upstairs, who sat with him for hours and asked him everything except the one question whose answer would have changed everything. She doesn't know that when she wakes up, the life she has been living will be over. Or she knows. Homer doesn't say. What we do know, the dream she described to the stranger, the eagle and the geese, ended with the eagle speaking, telling her what it was, telling her what the suitors were, telling her it was her husband, returned. And she said she didn't know which gate it came through. The gate of ivory, false dreams. The gate of horn, true ones. She didn't know which gate. But she announced the contest on the same night she told that dream. There is a version of Penelope who has been waiting genuinely, simply, faithfully, and who is about to receive the thing she has waited for. And there is another version, not incompatible with the first, of a woman who has understood for longer than she's admitted that the stranger in the hall is not a stranger, and who chose, nonetheless, to sit across from him for hours and say nothing, because she needed to know something first. Not is he alive, whether he knew her, still, not ended badly, just over. The particular shape of her days, the loom, the suitors, the palace, the knowing without knowing, the waiting without waiting, all of it will have resolved into something else. And she will have to decide whether that something else is what she wanted, or what she built herself to survive wanting. The sound of the bow being strung is not like anything else in this story. Everything else has been slow. 20 years slow. The accumulation of days that look almost like other days and are not. This is immediate. A string pulled taut. A note the way a plucked string rings before it settles. Odysseus does it as easily as a man who has done it 10,000 times before, which he has. But before we get to that moment, before the arrow, before the bodies, there is a smaller scene that happens the night before, that most retellings skip. Penelope orders the servants to wash the beggar's feet. An act of hospitality. Nothing remarkable about it. Guests are washed. Strangers are fed. This is how a proper household operates. Eurycleia, the old nurse, who has been with this family longer than almost anyone alive, takes the beggar's foot in her hands and feels the scar. A scar from a boar hunt, decades ago, before Troy, before everything. A scar she put the bandage on when Odysseus came home bleeding as a young man. She knows this scar. Homer says she recognized it immediately. Let go of his foot. The leg dropped into the basin. Water everywhere. She looked at him. He looked at her. He gripped her throat gently, urgently, and said, "Times do not say a word." She didn't. Think about that. The woman who raised him is now holding his secret in the same hands that recognized him. Penelope is upstairs. Athena is making sure she doesn't notice. The beggar who is not a beggar is sitting in the great hall of his own palace, and the only person who knows has no power to do anything with the knowledge except keep it, which she does, for an entire night. The suitors do not immediately understand what has happened. Then the arrow goes through all 12 axe heads. Then they understand. Then Odysseus stands up, and the arrows are pointed at Antinous. And the man who called the shroud a masterpiece of guile is the first one to die, before he even finishes understanding that this is the end. Penelope is upstairs. Athena has been keeping her asleep. Not because Penelope would interfere, because the gods, in this story, are very precise about what each person is supposed to witness and when. She is not in the room when Odysseus reveals himself. She is not there for the fighting. She is not there for the aftermath. She sleeps through the ending of everything that has defined the last 20 years. Eurycleia comes to get her. The old nurse, the one who, earlier, recognized Odysseus by the scar on his leg while washing the feet of the beggar. She has been holding this knowledge for hours. She comes to Penelope's room, practically vibrating with it. He's home. He's here. He killed them. All of them. The beggar. It was Odysseus. He's downstairs. He's alive. Penelope stares at her. Then, the gods have taken your wits. You're telling me a man who is dead is downstairs. Or a god came down and killed the suitors. This is not Odysseus. Odysseus is gone. Eurycleia says, I saw the scar. The scar from the boar hunt. I would know it anywhere. It's him. Penelope doesn't move toward the stairs. She says, let's go see. There is a difference. And now we are back at the beginning of this story. The great hall, Odysseus, standing, clean, restored, present. Penelope, sitting. The space between them, a few steps, 3,000 years. Telemachus, beside her. Sclerocardie, hard-hearted. Odysseus smiles. He tells Telemachus to let his mother test him. They have, he says, signs between them, things that only the two of them know. She will recognize him when she is ready to recognize him. Penelope hears this. She says nothing. She looks at him. What is she looking for? The scar is there. The nurse has seen it. The stories he told last night, the cloak, the brooch, the details that only Odysseus could know are still in her memory. She has been in the same room as this man for the better part of 2 nights. She is not identifying him. She is looking for something else. Whether the 20 years are visible on him in the same way they are visible on her. Whether the man standing in the hall still knows the things the man who left was supposed to know. Whether the distance, which for him was full of monsters and goddesses, and 10 years with a nymph who wanted to keep him, left him the same, or whether it changed him into someone she would have to learn again from the beginning. She asks Eurycleia to move the bed. The bridal bed, the one from the chamber they shared, bring it out here. Make it up in the hall. Odysseus speaks. Immediately, without hesitation. That bed cannot be moved. He built it himself. As a young man, there was an olive tree growing in the courtyard of the palace, a living tree, rooted and permanent, and he shaped the trunk into the bedpost and built the bedroom around it. It cannot be moved without cutting the tree. No one could know that except Odysseus. And Penelope, Homer writes, her knees went slack. Her heart surrendered. She crosses the room. She holds him She apologizes for the test. She says times the gods gave us grief and kept us apart. I was always afraid that someone would come and deceive me with false words. I could not welcome you until I knew. He holds her. Homer says they wept together the way survivors weep. The way people weep who have each spent years being told they had lost the other and who are now holding the proof that they had not. Homer says, as the sight of land is welcome to men who are swimming, so welcome was her husband to her eyes. The scholars who read this moment tend to focus on the recognition, the resolution of the plot, the hero home, the wife reunited. The long story ended in the way it was supposed to end. But I want to stay with what Penelope said. I could not welcome you until I knew. Not until I was certain you were him. Until I knew something slightly different, something that takes slightly longer and matters in a different way. The bed is proof of identity. She accepts that. But the way she explains her hesitation, the way Homer lets her explain it, is not, I thought you might be an imposter. It is, I have been doing this alone for a very long time. And I needed to know before I stopped. Not every ancient tradition let Penelope rest inside this reunion. Some later stories imagined other endings, darker, stranger, less merciful. But Homer leaves us here. With the bed still rooted in the tree, she is holding him. The bed is still rooted in the olive tree. The tree is still alive. Let's stay here for a moment. Because this scene, which takes up less than a page in most translations, contains something that is easy to miss if you're reading for the plot. The test Penelope devised is not the test of a skeptic. It is the test of someone who has been maintaining something in the absence of the person it was built for. The bed is not just proof. The bed is a record. Odysseus built it himself as a young man, before Troy, before everything from a living tree that was already rooted in the ground. He told her, she knew, and for 20 years, she kept that knowledge. Not as a tool, not as a strategy, not even consciously. Most of the time, just something she knew that no one else knew. The way you keep something of a person you love, not as evidence of who they were, but as a version of them that lives only in you. His hands on the wood, the specific grain of the bark he left on the parts he didn't need to smooth. The way the trunk still held the shape of what it had been before he made it into something else. She has slept in that bed for 20 years without him in it. And she has known, every night, the reason the bedpost doesn't move when she turns. The tree, still alive, still growing, slightly, the way living things grow, even when everything around them has stopped. The scholars who read this as a test of identity are right. It is that. But consider, it is also the only moment in the Odyssey where Penelope reaches for something that belongs exclusively to her and to him, not to the palace, not to the kingdom, not to the story of the hero and his long journey home, but to the two of them, specifically, before all of this, the olive tree, the bedroom built around it, the fact that to move the bed, you would have to cut the root. This is not a queen testing a stranger. This is a woman asking the man in the room whether he is still the person who decided to build a marriage around a living thing. The bed, the olive tree inside it, still rooted. He answers correctly. Of course he does. He built it. But his answer, the rush of it, the specificity, the way he doesn't hesitate or reach for a general truth, but goes immediately to the exact details, is also something. It is the answer of a man who has been carrying the same knowledge she has been carrying. Across 10 years of sea, through the island of Circe, through the years with Calypso, through the moment on Calypso's island when Homer says he sat on the rocks and looked toward home and wept. He was thinking of this, of the tree, of the room, of the specific weight of sleeping next to someone who knew the same thing you knew. They have both been carrying it, in parallel, without being able to tell each other they were carrying it, until now. And the question she has spent 20 years not asking the one that sat underneath the loom, underneath the unraveling, underneath every night she went back and took it apart, has been answered. He still knows the tree. He still knows the bed. And maybe that means he still knows her. The way you know someone, not by what they've become, but by what you built together before either of you knew what you were building. That after everything is enough. For now, it is enough. There is something you haven't finished. Not because you can't, because every night, without telling anyone, you come back to it and take it apart, just enough to start again tomorrow. Penelope unraveled her work every night for 3 years. No one forced her. Homer doesn't explain why. He only records that she did it. Alone, in the dark, while everyone else was asleep. The question isn't what you're waiting for. The question is, what are you unraveling every night so that tomorrow morning you still have a reason to sit back down and begin? Penelope crossed the room. When she was ready, not before. The bed was still rooted, the tree still alive inside the wood. Some things you build to last, not to finish. And when the thing you've been waiting for finally walks through the door, are you sure you still want it? Or have you fallen in love with the unraveling?